Greetings everyone, and welcome back to the class in Adobe Illustrator for Cartographers. This class, we want to work on creating a graphic scale for the map. Now, if you've gone through introductory geographic information systems, you know there are three different ways that we can express scale. We can do this through a representative fraction, we can do it through a verbal scale, or we can do it through a graphic scale. Sometimes you just use one particular method on a map for communicating a scale. Sometimes you use multiple methods. It just depends on the map and who your audience is. Now, of course, this map right here is just of a made-up area. I've just been going along and doing some things in order to show you some different techniques. So if you're following along, our map, well, it doesn't have any kind of projection information. It's just a picture. We'll work on getting our projection right when we start working on bringing in the technical aspects of cartography in later courses. That's something to keep in mind, but we don't have to worry about that right now. And likewise, whatever you're designing, the scale of the map is something that at the moment you can just determine. Of course, if you're actually bringing in data, then of course we have to deal with all of the things that we know about with projections and the different datums and the different coordinate systems and so forth in order to get our scale right. But we don't have to worry about that right now, because right now we're just mapping a made-up place, or we're just drawing a map. Or at least I am right here. So you can make up what kind of scale that you would like. In order to make things easy for me, I'm going to say that this map is being made at the scale of 1 inch represents 100 miles. That'll make things really, really easy. 1 inch represents 100 miles. That is a statement scale, also called a verbal scale. Now, please remember, and I hope you do from other classwork, that maps are always made to a particular size that the scale is valid for. We are currently working digitally. We're in a digital environment, which makes it very easy to zoom in and zoom out. If I need to see some more detail in an area, I can zoom in very easily, and I can zoom out. But it's important to remember, it's essential to remember, that this map is being made for a particular size. I said that this was going to be 8.5 by 11 when I set it up. So I'm designing a map here to be printed at an 8.5 by 11 size. That would mean that if I'm paying attention to all the technical aspects, as I should be if I'm actually bringing in data and I'm mapping a real place, that I'm intending for this map to be printed on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, exactly that size. And if you're holding that 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and you are looking at it and you pull out a ruler, then 1 inch will represent 100 miles. If you are remembering some introductory geographic information systems or some theory of cartography kind of work with scale, you know that one of the advantages of the graphic scale is that it will resize. If you zoom in, you zoom out, you resize your map, well, the graphic scale will resize at exactly the same rate as you happen to be zooming in or zooming out to the entire map. So the graphic scale will remain accurate, where a statement scale or a representative fraction will not. So if you happen to be working in an environment where you know that people will be resizing your map because they are on a screen, they're working digitally, they'll resize it. People's screens are different. Or if you're working in a situation where you're working with a projector giving a PowerPoint presentation and you're creating a map for that, then you know that if you use a graphic scale that it will resize. That's one of the advantages of the graphic scale or the bar scale. It has disadvantages, of course. It's not great for technical work. You'd much rather have a representative fraction if you're doing real technical analysis on a map and so forth. But one of the advantages is that it will resize. Putting both representative fractions on a map and statement scales are pretty easy. If this map I'm ultimately going to print at 8.5 by 11, then I can pull out the text tool, I can type in 1 inch represents 100 miles, and then if I'm never intending for it to be a digital copy, I'm intending for it to be this hard copy at that particular size, I can hand it out, and of course that will be correct. Likewise with a representative fraction. So I hope you remember from other work in Intro to GIS or in different cartography, the theory of cartography courses. I know you certainly will if you've been working through other courses with me. This particular representative fraction, 1,2,6,3,3,6,0. Go ahead and put the comma in. If you are working on a map that has a scale of 1 to 63360, you know that you are working on a map that has a verbal scale of 1 inch represents 1 mile. I told you that I'm designing this map as if it were on a scale of 1 inch represents 100 miles. So I can come over here and I can add a couple of zeros. And this would be the representative fraction of the map as I'm designing it. If this map that I were making were a scale of 1 inch represents 100 miles, the representative fraction would be 1 to 6,336,000. That would be the representative fraction of the map. And I could just put that down here on the map if I'm printing it off and will be handing out hard copies. Let me adjust. There we go, that looks a bit better. 1 to 633,60,0. Or I could certainly just grab my text tool and type in my statement scale of 1 inch represents 100 miles. Remember, represents, not equals. There we go. Now I have a perfectly good statement scale, assuming that this map is going to be printed off at exactly an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. This is the size that I've designed it for. It's that size at which the scale will be accurate, and I can start to pass out the map and the scale will be right. And certainly for technical usage, having the representative fraction there will be extremely beneficial. But I really don't need to go into a whole lot of detail about how to create statement scales and representative fractions on a map because they just use the text tool and you type them in. So I want to go over a little bit about how you might set up a graphic scale, or otherwise known as a bar scale, here in Adobe Illustrator. So we'll just set up a bar scale that, as if you were printing this off at 8.5 by 11, you would want a scale of 1 inch represents 100 miles. Alright, so let's get started drawing a bar scale. I'm going to zoom down here. I'm going to start off with black and white, and for demonstration reasons I'm going to bump up the weight a little bit. And then I'm going to go over here to my box, because traditionally you have different rectangles that show you the distances and they alternate between black and white. So let me just draw my first one. I want to be very specific about this, so I'm going to use the rectangle tool and I'm going to specify exactly how far that I want it. I know that I'm working on a map where 1 inch represents 100 miles. So my width is going to be 1 inch. That will be 100 miles in the real world. And then I choose the height of the box. And I think 0.15 inches will do. So I'm going to say OK. Now there I get that box. So that's a 1 inch box, and it looks like a pretty good component to my scale. So I can duplicate that. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it. The alignment tool will sort of help me line it up. I certainly want to use my alignment palette in the end to make sure that this is perfectly lined up. Whoop. Going to paste. For the sake of example, let me give you 4 right here. Now let me show what's going on. This one might be filled in black. Let me go over here to my color palette. Make it black. That means this one would also be black. Now what's going on right here? Each one of these should be exactly 1 inch long. Now let me show you something with the stroke. I'm going to send these 2 to the back. Arrange, send to back. Now just for the heck of it, I'm going to start bumping up the stroke. Do you see what's happening here? When I bump up the stroke, I'm actually reducing the size of that white. And it would be the reverse if I were trying to do a white stroke or whatever. But I want each one of those boxes to be exactly 1 inch because I want to be able to show that it's 1 inch represents 100 miles. I'm going to start specifying that. But if I have this stroke on those boxes and I start to adjust the stroke, even if I'm back down where I was, I bumped it up to exaggerate what was going on. But even if I'm down here with the 3-point or the 2-point stroke, look, let me select them all. I think I was at a 3-point stroke. I'm going to decrease down to 3. Even if I'm here, you can see that the boxes are ending where the yellow selection is, but that they're overlapping. That black box is overlapping this white box, and this white box is stopping before the end and so forth. So I don't actually have perfect representations of an inch inside that white box. I've got a little bit longer black box, is what it would look like when. This is no good for creating a graphic scale. You don't want to have stroke. In fact, when you're creating a graphic scale like this in Illustrator, stroke is your enemy. You want to turn off the stroke, and you want to create all of these boxes without it. I have them all selected, so I'm going to turn this down to 0. Now there is no stroke on any one. Let me click off of that. Now, admittedly, here I'm missing a border. I want to have a border, but we can fix that in a moment. But here I'm going black, white, and each one of those boxes is exactly 1 inch, and that's exactly what represents 100 miles. We're just supposing here on this particular map that I'm drawing. Now I'm sure that I'm not adjusting the size of my scale bar just because of the size stroke that I've got. One thing that I want to do, and I always stress, is to go out to even distances. So right now I would go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 400 miles. I don't want to do that. I'm going to copy one more time and go ahead and stick right over here on the edge using those alignment. Another one. That way my scale bar would go out to 500 miles. Sort of a nice even number, round numbers. You don't ever want your scale to go out to 738 miles, 327 kilometers, or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're nice and round. I'm going to group all of that. Now you might say, well, now what do? I don't want this to be so plain. I want it to have a little bit of an edge on it. And yes, I completely concur that it would look better if I had that. I'm going to draw a line. I know that this line will be exactly 5 inches in length because I got 5 1-inch segments. Go ahead and make it 0. That sounds good. And go ahead and generate that line and tell it that, hey, I would like for the line to be black. And then I'm going to start bumping up the stroke of that line. Now, I'm not exactly sure what's appropriate right here. Let me start with 20. I'm just going to line it up here. That's a bit too much. Maybe 16. Looks a little bit better. I think that looks pretty good. Now I've created a line that's going to be that background edge, that little edge to my bar scale, and that certainly does make it very finished looking. But I'm going to take that line and my scale and make sure that they're aligned vertically. And I think that I've been doing a pretty good job on making sure that I'm always snapping to my alignment guides. And then also align it to the left to make sure everything is exactly aligned like I want it. Now that looks pretty good. I'm not using the stroke around the boxes to create that black outline because when I do that it starts to screw up my scale by making the black and the white not the same size. The black and the white are exactly the same length right here, and I've used a line component behind it to create that edge. Now I've got a scale where I can say this right here is 0 and this right here is 500 miles. So if you've taken other classes with me, or if you will and go forward and start talking about the theory of cartography, then you will know that most of the time I like to see divisions before the 0, smaller divisions before the 0. Perhaps if you're doing thematic maps, you can get away with having just one scale bar that tells you a length because they're just for general reference anyway. But anytime that you're doing any type of map that's deliberately supposed to be read or studied, and one that especially is supposed to actually be used with a ruler in order to get a distance off of, you should put divisions before 0. In some particular case, I'm going to show how to use a scale bar to determine distance on a map. But if you do use maps and you do use a scale bar to get distances off of, you know that it's very, very handy to have a smaller increment before the 0. So let me show you how to do that. What I always do, I'm just going to slide this way, is take one of my boxes. So there's one, I'm going to copy it. Whoop! So what I had all of them grouped, I'm going to ungroup them for a moment. I'm going to take one, Okay, there we go. That's one division. So I'm going to put one division before the 0, and then I'm going to subdivide it into different groups. You get to decide exactly what you want to do for your subdivisions. Maybe in this case, depending on what the purpose of this map actually was, maybe it would be appropriate to divide that into 20-mile increments. I can very precisely do that. Now here it's not too difficult because I know that's exactly 1 inch. But this is one of those situations where scaling a non-uniform scale will really help you out. So if I go to Transform and then I say Scale, I can click on Non-Uniform, and I want the vertical scale to be 100%. I want not to scale in the vertical direction at all. I still want to maintain that, what I would call the height of that scale bar, to remain exactly the same. But what I want to do is scale that horizontally to 20%, because that will be 20 miles and not 100 miles. This particular scale makes it really easy to do. When I put in 20 in the horizontal, leaving vertical 100, look at that. I get 20% of that length. That's exactly what I want. So if I know that this distance represents 100 miles, that distance right there represents 20 miles. So I'm going to go 20. That right there is 40. That right there is 50. I want to make sure that I'm very, very lined up here. And I'll make sure of that with the alignment tools here in a moment. 20, 40, 60, 80, and then 100. That will get me back to 1 inch. And I want to be exactly sure that they're exactly what I want for my map. If this is black, then this one needs to be white, black, white, black, white. Now I've got this bar, and I can come through here. I also want to make sure that I extend that line so that I have the edge. And it should be very easy to say go to that edge right there. Now what do you do? Let me zoom over here. Here I'm ending in black, so it doesn't particularly matter. Ooh, look at that. Make sure that's cleaned up. Here I'm ending in white. So what do I do? Well, I sort of do think that it will look cleaner if this black line extends past there. Really, I don't need that anymore because it's showing through. And I can just extend that black edge. The scale bar is way too huge for this map. But I believe it's getting across the point of its construction. I probably want to make one about half this size in order to fit on this map. But since I've got a good scale here, I might as well continue to at least show what I would do. That's looking pretty good, actually, right there. And I know everything is lined up. You go into the white over here all the way to the end of the black. Looks really good. Then I start typing in my numbers. I want the 0 to go right there. I'm using the alignment guides to help me align it. I already have a 100, so I'm going to put it over here at that edge. And then I want to be sure that all of these are lined up. The alignment guides help me ensure that the 0 is exactly over here, the 100 is exactly at that edge, the 200 is exactly at that edge, and so forth. Finally, I can take my text tool and I need to type the unit that this is in, which is in miles. I'm going to put it underneath the middle of my scale bar. So that's how to create a scale bar in Illustrator. If you know the representative fraction of your map at the size that it's supposed to be printed, then you should be able to convert your representative fraction into the necessary components of a graphic or bar scale. Don't make one that looks like this. I've obviously made mine way too huge. Yeah, look at that. That's 24 points. Let me go down to at least 12. That's looking better, but still probably I would make a bar scale about half that size to go on this map. But that's the basics of how to create a bar scale inside Illustrator and the kinds of things you need to watch out for to ensure that your scale is accurate. Obviously, the accuracy of the scale is an essential component of the map.